Endowment, a private foundation supporting NPR's coverage of religion and spirituality, and Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. Sexual abuse used to be something we didn't talk about. It was swept under the rug, hidden away. It was the approach taken both by abusers and their victims, even loved ones who knew about it, but felt it best to stay silent. Well, that is changing. The Me Too movement resulted in women and some men stepping out of the shadows and naming the names of their abusers. Those abused by members of the clergy also moved to name their abusers and call for accountability. And now the Epstein Files have taken center stage. In one of the few bipartisan efforts in today's politics, people on both sides of the aisle are demanding the release of the information in those files. Who did what to whom? And they are demanding accountability. That's proven to be extremely difficult. It takes courage for victims to come forward. We'll call them survivors from this point on. Often the balance of power is insurmountable, and those who do come forward must endure the media spotlight. What is it like for those individuals? What is it like for those who may have been abused but are still reluctant to come forward, even as others do? Is it worth the potential danger, the pain? This hour, we speak with some survivors of sexual violence and with a therapist who works with survivors. Dr. David Brantley III is a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in helping people heal from trauma, often using approaches from his own life experiences. Crystal Emerick is a sexual assault survivor and founder and executive director of Brave Step, which helps individuals impacted by sexual violence. And Bob Anderson is also a survivor of sexual assault. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
Good morning, Mike.
Good morning. So, Doctor, I'm going to start with you because we're going to be talking about surviving sexual assault. So let's define precisely what sexual assault is.
Well, it is a bit of a broad spectrum. The basic definition is unwanted sexual contact, and it can range from unwanted touching all the way to the other end of the spectrum. And where we see people is based on how much it impacts them and their ability to kind of engage in the activities of daily living and engage in a healthy life.
So are most of the perpetrators male?
I would say a majority of the perpetrators are male. Yes, I don't know the exact percentage, but yes.
Sexual assault has been going on since the very beginning of humanity. It seems to be coming out of the shadows in just the last decade or so, as so many other things have as well. Was it always in the shadows? And if so, why? Why has it been lurking and people suffering in silence?
Why questions are difficult to answer. I think it has always been in the shadows, and I think part of the reason it's been in the shadows is just that there's a multifactorial aspect to it. It's not just sexual assault. It's sexual assault interacting with the patriarchy, interacting with how power is distributed, and interacting with a bunch of different things that kind of sustain it and put it in that area where it's advantageous for people in power or people in that structure for it to be in the shadows. So it's not just people's individual reactions, it's how we're socialized, it's the language that we use. All of those things kind of keep it into the shadow. So why? Difficult to answer, but the mechanisms of how it happens and the reasons behind it, those kind of things we can get a sense of.
And Crystal, you've been nodding as Dr. Brantley has been talking, and it seems to me when he mentioned the patriarchy, that is precisely what is keeping the Epstein Files closed, pretty much.
Exactly. And I think that, I mean, to Dr. Brantley's point, I mean, and to your point, Mike, I mean, sexual trauma has been in our history from the very beginning of time. And traditionally, and not exclusively, but traditionally, it is a male having power over a female. Now there are men who are also having power exercised over them in inappropriate ways. So I don't want to exclude men survivors, but the structure of that dynamic and the token that women have always been just pieces into the chess game, if you will, makes it so easy for us to be silenced, even for male survivors to be silenced as well. But I do think that our patriarchy right now is protecting the Epstein files and really the justice and the recognition that deserves to be paid to this issue.
When most of us think about sexual assault, we think of it in the physical realm, touching, actually being in the presence of somebody and doing unwanted things to them, touching them, whatever it may be, right up to rape. Uh, but there's also an online component to this as well. Suddenly, social media has become this platform for a new kind of sexual crime. We know of teenagers who have been fooled into sending various photographs of themselves and then being blackmailed or being threatened in some way. Some of these teenagers have taken their own lives as a result of that. And there are other forms of sexual assault being perpetrated and experienced online. Are we beginning to see this, Doctor, as equally serious, as equally damaging, maybe even more so? Or is that possible?
Absolutely equally damaging. I mean, there's also a component that you haven't mentioned, which is deep fake. In other words, you can take somebody's face and create graphic images of them engaged in sexual activity and distribute them that can be, at this point with AI, indiscernible from reality. So there's that component of it also.
So are these being experienced, Carol, Crystal, basically by young people?
That's what the data is showing us, that it is currently younger people, but there is a subset of population that live and lurk online they're using deep fake and sexual exploitation online as a means to groom kids to be able to have in-person interactions with them. So I completely think that the online world of sexual trauma is becoming more and more dangerous by the minute. The challenge is, how do we put parameters in place? And I think there's some even legislation being discussed around this, but how do we put some barriers in place to protect our youth and our adults? Because this is only going to get worse unless we can rope it in or rein it in.
Crystal and Bob, you are both sexual assault survivors. I'm just curious, Bob, what was the interval between what you experienced and when you decided to come forward and were willing to talk about it?
That's a good question. And we've talked about it a little bit, or you've mentioned that before, as far as being silent. I was first experienced sexual violence when somewhere around 7, 8, 9 years old. And at that time, sometime in that process, I was told that I had to be quiet. And I was told this by a family member. So it was over 20 years before I was able to come forth and start talking about it. And that's very hard. And that's a I can remember growing up as it's almost like a cloud hanging over me. And so that's a very traumatizing thing to have to do.
So if I've done the math right, you were in your mid to late 20s when you decided to come
That's
forward.
correct. Yeah.
What made you decide the time the time was right?
It was just time, I guess, over all those years building up and building up inside me that I just at that time thought that was something I just had to do. Yeah.
And
For my
how
own
long were
welfare.
how long were the episodes that you endured?
I'm sorry.
How long were you being preyed upon? Let's put it that way.
Um, Over several months. I'm not exactly sure. A lot of that stuff, Mike, I've
It's a
I've,
hog.
I've blocked out, but
Mhm.
um, it was over several months, and it was by a neighbor. It was not by a family member, but it was one of our neighbors.
Crystal, same questions to you. The interval between your experience and the time you decided it was time to come forward, and the fact that now you are helping other people deal with the outcome of this.
This is, I think, a lifelong journey for all survivors, really, and in particularly for me, Mike. I was around 3 is the earliest that we can piece together. Also by a family member that lasted over the course of about 10 years. And then in college, I experienced several additional sexual assaults. So by the time I moved to Charlotte I was in my early 20s. I was I would say rock bottom, and more familiar. I was a hot mess, if you will, Mike, because I was just so struggling with all of the ramifications of what the trauma had done, and then spent my first 10 years in therapy right after I moved to Charlotte. So that would have been 21, I think 2021. I'm sorry, 2011, and then I'm back in therapy again, just continuing to kind of unpack some of the trauma.
So today you are the founder. Oh, go ahead, Bob. Go ahead.
I was just going to mention, piggybacking on something that was said earlier about this is a lifelong journey. And it's not something that, just happens, well, I'm going to go get therapy and then miraculously it's all behind you. I'm 78 years old and I'm still, I mentioned to someone the other day that you get to a point in your life and you feel pretty good. And you could go several years, many years, and then all of a sudden someone will say something, or something will jar something in your memory, and it'll all come flooding back, and you just have to deal with it again. So it's not, like I said, it's just not something you can just get over and say, hey, get on with your life. You do get on with your life, but it's always in the back of your mind somewhere, at least for me.
Dr. Brantley, I'm going to ask you yet another why question. And maybe I'll phrase it differently so it's not a why question, but it is Bob's story similar to the people that you have helped in your practice? Is it difficult? Is it a lifelong struggle for some people? And if it is not, what makes them different from those for whom it is? You unmute yourself,
Yeah.
Dr.
So,
Brantley.
the people that I've encountered, and I can only speak anecdotally for the people that I've encountered directly, is it has been a lifelong thing. Not only has it been a lifelong thing, but because it impacts a person's sense of self, a person's sense of identity, a sense of their relation to the world and the people around them. Um, it can be all encompassing. It can be. I do want to backtrack to something that Bob and Crystal were also saying when I get a chance. But to fully answer your question, it is lifelong. And later on, I guess we're going to talk about Dr. Judith Herman's model, trauma-focused care, which has the supposition that it's there's stages, but the stages aren't linear. It's not you go from here, progress to here, progress to here. It's kind of a model where you go from stage one, maybe to stage two, maybe coming back to some aspects of stage one as those issues are resolved, and kind of going through that. And it's just kind of a continual process.
And today, Crystal, you are the founder and executive director of Brave Step, which, among other things, works to give survivors of sexual violence the tools they need to prevent future violence. I have 30 seconds. Talk about the value of coming forward, of going public with somebody's trauma.
One of our former therapists used to say that sexual trauma is like mold in a basement, and until you can eradicate that mold, it will linger and eventually take over the house, in theory. And so I think that when people come forward, it gives them a chance to begin that recovery journey, Mike, which again is not linear and is lifelong.
So are you saying that if you don't come forward, that you can't heal?
There are ways to improve your well-being, but it is always there. It will never go away.
We have to stop. We'll come back with more of this conversation on the other side. It's Charlotte Talks.
On the next Charlotte Talks, we look into the new report on infant mortality issued by the Mecklenburg County Health Department. It's a mixed bag. Birth outcomes have improved, but disparities remain. We hear about the positives and what's being done to combat the disparities tomorrow at 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
I'm Scott Tong. A U.S. fighter jet shot down over Iran as the U.S., Israel, and Iran trade missile and drone strikes. 5 weeks into the war, how the military campaign is going, and whether there's progress on the indirect talks to end the conflict. Next time, Here and Now.
You can catch Here and Now today at noon on WFAE. Support comes from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, helping public radio advance journalistic excellence in the digital age. The Knight Foundation believes informed and engaged communities are essential for healthy democracy. More at kf.org. Support also comes from Givens Aldersgate, a 230-acre not-for-profit life plan community surrounded by nature, with new residential homes for active adults 55 and older in Charlotte. GivensAldersgate.org.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about sexual assault survival and the value of coming forward with Dr. David Brentley. He's a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice. Crystal Emerick is the founder of and the executive director of Brave Step. She is also a sexual assault survivor, as is our other guest, Bob Anderson. And Bob, men may have a more difficult time with coming forward, at least going public with it. It's one thing to seek out therapy. It's another thing to tell your friends and neighbors that you were a victim of sexual assault. It seems to be more difficult for men. How difficult was that for you?
Like many men, like you've mentioned that it's very difficult. It's something that I grew up and you grew up. Many men still grow up today with the macho type of mentality. You know, men don't cry. Men can tough it out, and of course that's absolutely not the truth. So, in the short answer is it's very difficult. And in this Charlotte area, I just want to mention before we go too far, that as far as agencies in this area that have a program that help men, it's very difficult to find that. And I actually had someone come to me one time and said, "Bob, can you help me? Is there some?" And wasn't a man; it was a woman trying to find help for someone she knew. And she says, "Is there someone or some place in this area that he can go and for a group type setting and to start some help?" And I told her I would investigate it for her and get back to her. Short answer is there are not many or hardly any group help for men in this area. There's many for women. But when you start looking around, I looked for a couple of months before I was able to get in contact with a Brave Step. And when I started, Crystal and I started talking, and it's something that she was interested in, and we've started a program at Brave Step that actually it's a peer group for men who have encountered sexual violence in their life. So yeah, it's very difficult, Mike.
Dr. Brantley, is the process of healing, therapeutically speaking, substantially different for men than it is for women? Is it a longer journey? Are there different steps involved? How would you describe it?
I don't think there are different steps involved. I don't have much experience. I haven't encountered many male survivors in my practice and my experience. So I'll say but there are aspects to it. I've encountered one or two. There are aspects to it that are a bit different. One of the aspects can be in terms of the nature of the incident or the nature of the abuse, what their experience was like during the abuse. We know that there's certain types of acts where the prostate can be stimulated. It can be kind of pleasurable. So some people have the way that they're groomed, they experience the experience as pleasurable, although it's a violation.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, it's just a violation. And for some of them, it can cause kind of confusion about their sexual identity, about their sexual preference, about their identity, and so on and so forth. So that's one dynamic I think that can be different that I've noticed anecdotally.
So, Crystal, you've been developing this program. Bob just alluded to a moment ago about this. What has been your experience with that?
It's so interesting, Mike, as kind of an advocate for survivors. I've had the um, I would say it's kind of it is a blessing to hear from several male survivors over the years, and to both of their points, I mean, the dynamic is different, and I'm coming, of course, from a woman who's experienced it, and hearing hundreds of other women's stories. The dynamic seems so different based on what the society tells a man they should or should not be, and what sexuality should and shouldn't be. What I would say though, kind of piggybacking on both of them, is we know both through Brave Step, but also hearing from clinical experts like Dr. Brantley, all survivors have some level of depression or anxiety. A lot of survivors come with complex PTSD, very much similar to combat veterans. We also see suicidal ideation, cutting. The mental health damage from sexual trauma is so deep. And often, and maybe Dr. Brantley can add to this, a lot of survivors, when they do seek support, they're not seeking it for their trauma. They're seeking it for anxiety or depression or, one other presenting factor. And then as a therapist is digging into their experience, they're realizing that their trauma oftentimes is at the root of whatever their issue is.
Doctor.
So to piggyback on what Crystal is saying, I've also, as a therapist, lost count of how many people have been misdiagnosed. So for a number of factors. One factor is I've also lost count of how many people I've seen of all ages, including people that are seniors and well into adulthood, that I am the first living soul that they've told about the abuse. That's a very common theme. So as a result of that, and these are not people who have never come for help. These are people who might have been in therapy for years, who might have been in the system, who might have been psychiatrically hospitalized, who I may be the first person that they're telling, even after all of this. As a result of that, you get people who are misdiagnosed. You get people who are diagnosed with bipolar disorder, even though they don't meet the full criteria for bipolar disorder. And of course, the treatment's not effective because it's not addressing the issue. And then these people can be medicated. And of course, the medication is not effective because it doesn't address the issue. And they become frustrated with therapy. They become disillusioned with therapy. And it spirals and can create a vicious loop of the situation of the circumstances kind of perpetuating themselves.
And one of the reasons they keep it close to the vest is something that you have talked about when you tell your story. This began for you, Crystal, at the age of 3, and children have to be terribly confused by what that experience is like. They have no words, they have no experience that can explain it to anybody, including themselves. And you say that you developed a keen sense of guilt and shame, feeling dirty, and ultimately lost, which would be enough not to tell anybody about this ever, including a therapist. Why did that experience for a 3-year-old make you feel that way?
Well, I think, I mean, you put it so beautifully, Mike. I mean, we don't, at that age, we don't have the maturity, the words, the understanding to know what's happening to us. And then the dynamics of, will I get in trouble? So I thought for a long time, if I had told anyone, I would be the one that was in trouble because it was my fault, even though we know as adults now that that is not true. And so you just live in that sense of fear. And over time, it's interesting because this is like part of my therapy session today, is over time, we develop these survival mechanisms to just get through it. And what's interesting is even now in therapy, I am continuing to identify these mechanisms that I created as a child to just make it through. And again, it goes back to this lifelong learning of how that trauma really shapes who you become and how you respond to the world around you.
Yeah. And even as a 7 or 8-year-old, Bob, you then did not have the vocabulary, the understanding, the experience to understand what was going on. Did you have similar feelings of guilt and shame, etc.?
I did. And I think Crystal has stated this, that it's incomprehensible that someone that was violated feels shame and guilt themselves. I can't
Right.
explain that, but it happens. And it takes years to get over that.
This is not as you would hope, but it's not a rare occurrence. According to what I've read in the last couple of days about this, Crystal, I think it was you that said your website says that sexual assault happens on average every 96 seconds. I've heard more frequency than that, 68 seconds. I'm not sure how those numbers are arrived at. What is that based on, that figure? Because that sounds enormously high.
Yes. So there's a national organization called RAIN and of course the CDC who do a lot of this data set. Although I would argue, and I think most people working in this space, the data is imperfect, right? Because there's so much silence around this issue. The more recent information from the CDC says nearly 1 in 2 women and more than 1 in 6 men experience sexual violence. Going back to the fact that 63% never report, we know those numbers are actually a lot higher. But I wanted to circle back to we were just talking about it being like sexual trauma within a family or a trusted environment. The power of that dynamic is so important. And that power dynamic, especially when it's someone that you trust and arguably adore. I mean, my childhood perpetrator was someone that I looked up to and I trusted. And so when you add in that dynamic of trust and power, it really shifts everything. But it can happen, of course, in relationships with people that you don't know when you're traumatized by someone you don't know. Majority of the time, it's someone you do know.
And Bob, we hear more about the incidents of sexual assault on women than we do on men. And so men, I understand, when they experience this, have an extra component. They feel they're alone, that this has never happened to anybody else but them. And what about me made this happen to me? What did I do? And we've heard that from women too. What did I do? And they did nothing. The perpetrators are the people that did what they did. But what kind of an impact does that have? This feeling of being exclusive have on a man?
Well, I'm not sure that I ever consciously thought that.
Okay.
But yeah, I was certainly alone, and I was alone mainly because I had to be quiet. And going back to talking about people in authority and people that you trust as a child, that's almost, I mean, not necessarily how many people you trust, but as a child, people of authority, everybody you run into is a person of authority. And to have someone violate you using that authority is something that, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
And
that
as a child, you have very little defense for that. I mean, you can't go up against figures of authority, and you're a small person.
absolutely.
They're not. Crystal.
Well, I was going to ask, Bob and I just had a conversation about a week ago about the generational gap or the generation that many of us were raised in where you didn't talk about this. Bob, do you want to add to that generational conversation?
Well, I mean, it's not like I've said earlier in this program here. Yeah, that was quite common, and men just didn't. And then today, men don't talk about. They feel that it's a weakness in them, and they've got to be strong. But as the older I get, or the more people I talk to, particularly with men, um, I've found out that, like you said, 1 in 6. I mean, if you're in a room with 25 people, uh, you can do the math. So there's
Right.
people in that room that have experienced the same things that you have. And once you start talking, um, it makes it easier for someone else to say, yeah, that happened to him. It's happened to me.
When
It might be
when you
my time now to speak up. Yeah,
if you're in a room of 24 people, that means about four of those individuals have experienced what you, Bob, experienced. So when you discover that, when you discover that you are not alone, that there are others who experience something similar to what you've gone through, does it lessen the pain?
absolutely. It certainly does. It lessens the pain, and I've actually spoke to someone here recently too, within the last few weeks. The more that I talk about it personally, the better I become, the stronger I become. So that's one of the things I want to get out to men, that the importance of speaking will not only help you, but it also helps someone else.
So, Doctor, he may have just answered my question to you, because there are these rigid stereotypes around masculinity that are violated when a person is violated through sexual assault. So how can those men be helped? Therapy certainly is a way, but just talking with each other, that can help?
That can absolutely help. What most lay people don't realize is that group therapy can be much more effective and much more potent than individual therapy. I mean, sometimes people need individual therapy to transition into group therapy, but group therapy as a modality is much more powerful, because you do have, I mean, a therapist can tell you A, B, and C, and you can intellectually believe it, but not believe it in layperson terms. You can intellectually believe it, but not believe it here. Someone can tell you it's not your fault, and you understand intellectually that it's not your fault, but you don't, on some level, believe it. So our
Ah,
job is to reach that core where we can get them to believe it. There's mechanisms for that. One of the things that complicates things is that we as a society send mixed messages to men. We tell men on, we give them the whole men are supposed to be macho, but then we tell men to open up and to speak and that there's no shame, and then randomly punish them for it.
hmm.
You reveal weakness, you cry, your significant other says, you're crying, I can't respect you. There's just a mixed message where it's not, we get the message that it's not safe. I know later on in the show we may talk about interventions and what we can do. So sorry, go on
I,
ahead.
I want to talk about the perpetrators of all this. When we hear about men raping women, we often hear that it's a power dynamic. The abuse is not sexual; it is power. Is that the same in all these cases when young children are violated, et cetera? Is there a profile of people who most often are likely to be perpetrators? Are they doing it for the same reasons?
Definitely, I think power is a strong component of it. Everyone has sexual urges. Not everyone has the urges to assault someone, to dominate someone, or to force themselves upon a person. So there's definitely a major component of it is dominance and exertion of control. On the flip side of that, for the person that is the survivor of it, it's their control being taken away. One of the things we have to address as therapists is giving them that agency, re-giving them that agency. So it's almost like a transactional thing where the people who are perpetrating are taking and exerting power.
Mhm.
And I have about a minute left in this segment. Is there something about the victims, the survivors, the people who are being preyed upon that makes them prey, or is it completely random? Is it just a shot in the dark by the perpetrators?
It's a combination of opportunity. And one thing I think that people look for, especially the perpetrators, they're looking for, not only is it their technique to isolate people, it's their technique to search for people who are in some sense already isolated. So they can
Mhm.
find someone who some aspect of them isolates them from a support group. That's what they'll do, in addition to isolating them further so that they can do what they do.
When we come back, I want to talk about what it's like for people who have yet to come forward, who are watching what's going on around the Epstein Files and the Me Too movement and other things. What is it like for them? What is it doing to them? We'll do that and more when we come back at Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
Coming up, both Iran and the U.S. have been accused of committing or planning war crimes since the war began. But what does it actually mean to label a military action a war crime? That's next time on 1A, beginning at 10 on WFAE.
Would you like to leave your mark and help ensure WFAE's future as a vital news source for the Carolinas? Consider making a charitable gift through your donor-advised fund by donating appreciated stock or through a qualified IRA distribution. These giving options are powerful ways to make a meaningful impact today. Learn more by calling 704-926-9323. Thank you.
Support comes from Via Health Partners, now providing home-based primary care to patients living with serious and chronic illnesses. Via's focus is to provide personalized care in the comfort of one's home. More at viahp.org. And by Drexel University, an R1 research institution, Drexel prioritizes high activity research and development and is committed to offering student experiences that help impact society. More at drexel.edu.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFAE.org. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about sexual assault survival with Dr. David Brantley, licensed clinical psychologist in private practice. Bob Anderson is a sexual assault survivor, as is Crystal Emerick. She is also the founder and executive director of Brave Step. We've been witnessing a lot of news surrounding sexual assault, even though the majority of sexual assaults go unreported. So we have the Me Too movement, we have something else in between that and the Epstein Files. But all of this is unfolding as people who have experienced this are watching. Crystal, what does that do to those folks? Are they all having to relive the worst moments of their lives as they hear about this on the news?
Many do, Mike. I mean, it's very re-traumatizing to both hear the dynamics of the trauma when it's happened to someone else, and even to some extent what folks may be listening to this morning. But I think it's the reaction, the community at large, a very broad net when we're saying community, how the community is responding is even more re-traumatizing. When we, as a community, diminish, silence, disregard, that is as harmful in so many ways as the initial trauma itself.
So when the people who are involved in the Epstein Files talk about being ignored by the White House, because it's the White House, Congress wants them to release this. So it's the Trump administration, it's Donald Trump and his cohorts that are keeping this information away from them. When they talk about the frustration, it's more than frustration.
Well, in the conversations that I've had with individual survivors, it's anger, it's outrage, it is such a strong, and it's almost like hard to put into words, but not being seen, not being heard, and certainly not being supported. I mean, this issue completely disrupted and devastated lives. I mean, beyond measure. And we have, as a community, we have largely brushed it under the rug and moved on to other issues. And those people who were responsible and who are named in the Epstein files have not been held accountable. And it appears likely won't be held accountable. And that is, it's outraging to the survivor community, I think.
Talk to me about the value. Oh, go ahead, Bob. Go ahead.
I'll just piggyback on one word that Crystal just said, anger. And that's what it does for me. When I hear that, I get very angry. I mean, sometimes I'll yell at the TV and just say, you can't see what's going on, covering it up, all these redacted pages. People know what's going on. What's wrong with you for allowing this to continue? So
talk to me about, from a survivor's point of view, both you, Bob, and Crystal, talk to me about the value of accountability, of getting justice, whatever that may be. Who would like to go first? Crystal, go ahead. Or Bob?
Well, I would say, I mean, justice is very different, right? For every single survivor. Like I never went through the legal system. For me, that wasn't justice. I think with this the current situation that we had, I would love to see these individuals who were responsible and for violating all of these other survivors. I'd love to see them held accountable, and really,
What would that look like, accountability?
I think, and this is coming from my own personal survivor, I would love for them to be kind of dismantled in a public way, because they have, even for those who have stepped down from their positions of authority, they're still living their life. They still have a fluid bank account. They still have power. They still have support. Nothing has largely changed. That
They still have their reputation as well.
Yeah, or they hire a publicist to rebrand their reputation or rebrand their company, right? Like we've seen this already happen, and none of that, Mike, none of that comes close to the depth and the horror and the pain that a survivor has experienced. And so, again, like justice is a little bit of a gray area, but I would love for them to feel some of what they did to these individuals and tossed aside. Like, so I don't have a great example. It's just it's a powerful question of what would that look like?
We talked earlier, Bob, about the value of not of realizing that you're not alone. That Dr. Brantley mentioned that group therapy can often be more beneficial than just talking one-on-one with the therapist, because you're with people who have experienced what you have experienced, and you feel a camaraderie, and that you are not isolated. You are not alone. As the Me Too movement unfolded, as we heard about the abuses within the Catholic Church and other churches, not just the Catholic Church, with the clergy preying on children and other folks in their congregations, as the Epstein Files have dominated the news, is it making it easier for survivors to talk about this, to come forward, or are they being plagued with having to struggle through reliving this? Which is the stronger pull? Which is the stronger result of all this publicity?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it has made it easier because it's just a different way, not a personal way, but a different way of bringing this subject out into the open. So from that aspect, I think it does make it different. And I was speaking with a group of men fairly recently, and one of them specifically said that, yeah, that talking with you guys is just making all the difference in the world. He says, I really appreciate that. He was so appreciative of us being able to correspond and be open and honest with him. And it really does make a difference, Mike.
Doctor, talk to me about the trauma of what's happening with survivors of sexual assault when they're witnessing the stonewalling in Washington over the Epstein files. Is that a different kind of trauma? Are they being sent a message that is equally traumatic?
Absolutely, they're being sent a message that is equally traumatic. Um, I'll I'll speak for people who I've seen that there's the re-traumatization of being exposed to it again, but there's also re-emphasizing that I don't matter. They're getting away from it with it. This is continuing. I don't matter. It doesn't matter what I accomplish. It doesn't matter who I raise. It doesn't matter what degrees I get, what I do with my life. In the end, I don't matter because this is playing out like this. So there's that. One of the things that, backtracking a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, one of the things that I have to deal with in therapy is helping the people that I see cope with justice denied or justice deferred. It's something that they have to live with, and we have to find a way to help them to live with that because we can't change what's going on out there in session, and they can't change it as an individual. The things we can do as a society, things that we can do in having this show in Sexual Awareness Month and the mission of Brave Step, that in the long run are going to address that. But I have to get them through right now dealing with the fact that justice is not being addressed.
So all of this attention that's being placed on these incidents of sexual assault over time, the Me Too movement, et cetera, is that bringing more people to therapy? Is it actually maybe in an odd way helping them seek the help they need because they're inundated with news about this?
It is. And the other factor is, and my children are Generation Alpha and Generation Z, there's also a normalization of mental health issues and addressing mental health issues. You'll see much more likely someone on social media saying, well, my therapist said this, and I'm in therapy for this, and I'm dealing with this. So there's a confluence of things. Everything is multifactorial, and those two things are working in concert. The Me Too movement, the aftermath, and the prevalence of this issue in the news, plus that normalization of dealing with mental health issues.
I want to come to you in a second, Crystal, but can bringing people to justice, making them be accountable for their actions. Can that aid in healing? Can it speed up healing, Doctor?
I'm gonna say something controversial. I don't necessarily. I don't necessarily. I think when it's deferred, we want to think that that's going to have an impact, but a lot of the healing is going to take place. It's going to be internal processes. It's not going to be that that person was brought to justice and now I feel better. There's going to be things. There are things you have to address. That those are the things we focus on in therapy. Those are the things that need to be addressed for healing to occur. It's almost like those revenge movies where you got the person that killed your family, but you don't feel any better. Just to give a real clumsy analogy from a Clint
Right.
Eastwood movie. But I hope that answers the question.
Crystal and Bob. Crystal, you first get your hand up before I ask that last question.
Well, I also think that there's a really critical component here that it's that community of support, and we've all alluded to it to some extent. But when you have family, friends, loved ones, allies, a group, it could be a men's group or a women's group or whomever group, but when you have a community that supports you, we know both like professionally and personally, your trajectory for recovery is improved, exponentially. Where if you have a community that doesn't support you, whether that's small community or big community, it can set you back. And again, it just delays or makes that recovery journey more difficult. And so I think that the importance of a good, solid, healthy, supportive community is everything. And I think that the conversations are building that slowly but surely.
Bob.
Yes, I just wanted to affirm what Dr. Brantley just said, at least from my perspective, as far as justice. Well, not all, the perpetrator in my instance is dead, and all the people around that is dead. So there will never be, quote, justice. But I believe that the healing does come from within, and the justice portion is probably, the gravy, but it's not necessary. It would be good, but if someone is dead or alive, that doesn't change what's happened to me.
Right.
So I still have to deal with that and move forward.
Doctor.
So piggybacking on what Crystal said about the importance of community, one aspect of community that is really helpful is what we're trying to do is give people a sense of autonomy, a sense of agency, and taking back their power. And being part of a community, the benefit you get from that is that one, you're seeing that it's normalized. You're seeing that there are other people that are going through things that you're going through. Two, there are people who have found hacks or found ways to deal with stuff that you're struggling with. Three, most important to me, is you get a chance. There are things that you have mastered, things that you have done that other people are struggling with, and it gives you a chance to help them. It gives you a chance to take that power back, to take that agency back, to take that sense of self back, where you're not only part of a community, you're contributing to the community, and it's helping to heal what you've been through.
One of the few people who have been called out for what happened in the Jeffrey Epstein era has been the former Prince Andrew of Great Britain. And yet, according to the British publication The Observer, not the Charlotte Observer, the British publication, Jeffrey Epstein has become a meme, not a monster. They say that the various AI videos of Epstein have diluted the horror of his crimes through humor and irony. And the writer of that article in The Observer says that this, quote, allows public engagement without moral reckoning. You don't have to sit with horror if you are laughing. You don't have to ask who enabled him, protected him, benefited from his silence, or joined in on his abuse when the story itself becomes a joke. But if a joke about Epstein makes him the laughing stock, if he's the brunt, if he is the fool, if it denigrates him, is that necessarily a bad thing, Doctor? I mean, could it be helpful to those who have been harmed, or is humor like this simply off limits?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think that, as you're mentioning, it can be a coping mechanism. It can be a way of taking power away from those who are perpetrators. But it is a double-edged sword, because while it can do that, it can also be used to further the agenda, to minimize. So it's context. It depends on when they're using it, how it's being used, and who it's being used by.
We're also living through a time in which many social norms have fallen by the wayside. Witness Donald Trump's tweet over the weekend. Apparently, it has become acceptable in some circles to say all sorts of things that we would never have said in polite company, and it's given permission for people to do the same. People at the very top have done this. The old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me, may not be true. The Harvard Kennedy School conducted a study on the connection between misogynistic humor and self-reported rape proclivity in men, and found that in the context of sexist humor, men more prone to hostile sexism felt freer to express their antagonism against women through subtle sexist acts as well as sexual. In this environment, are these acts on the rise? Dr. Brantley.
I think Crystal might be more aware of whether or not these acts are on the rise,
Crystal?
so I'm going to defer that question to her.
Crystal?
I don't know in a data sense, Mike, but I think in at least the exposure that I've had, it certainly seems that way. And behavior at the highest levels have only empowered more of that behavior. And so it is, I mean, our words are weapons, and we know that in how we represent ourselves, both for the current generation, but I have a 9-year-old son. Do I want my son seeing that form of behavior and how women are treated and replicate that? Heck no. Like it's, so I don't have the data, but I have the feeling, the sense.
For those who may be experiencing this but cannot, who would like to seek help, they've heard this conversation perhaps, but cannot afford a therapist, what are their options? And I have 30 seconds.
Well, Brave Step is here, of course, to help fill that gap. So we offer very affordable sliding scale individual counseling along with a host of other different services. But I'll say, Mike, in closing, like the hardest step is the first one. And once you begin that first step, it becomes the second and the third, and the journey begins.
Crystal Emerick is a sexual assault survivor, as is Bob Anderson. Crystal's also the founder and executive director of Brave Step. They were here along with Dr. David Brantley, a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice specializing in trauma recovery. Thank you all for the hour.
Charlotte Talks is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte